This is the World Organic News for the week ending 20th of March 2017. Jon Moore reporting. This week we begin with a spirited post from Crimson Highway entitled, "Organic food shouldn't be considered special. Instead, cheap food made with harmful chemicals should be considered expletive deleted." As I said, this is a spirited piece. And if you click through, be aware of strong, even offensive language. The point, though, is well made. As we have discussed in earlier episodes, the health costs of chemically forced, pesticide-laden food are not included in their sale price. That zillions of carrots can be grown across a landscape and put up on the supermarket shelves for under $1 a kilo is suggestive of something a little bit screwy. Indeed, on the matter of price, I have long wondered why oranges shipped across the Pacific from California should be cheaper to purchase than oranges grown a few hundred kilometres away from home. This questioning received a bit of a kick along during this Irish sojourn. Not oranges, but bananas being the focus. How could bananas from Coffs Harbour, a mere 6 hours by road from home, be more expensive than bananas in Ireland? Even when comparing bananas to bananas through currency exchange, they are still cheaper in Ireland. I was informed by the locals that Irish bananas were flown in from the Caribbean, a 13-hour flight away. So as I said, there is something screwy in the price signals and market mechanisms when it comes to food. Then when we toss in the concerns raised by Crimson Highway's post, someone somewhere is rent-seeking and passing the costs on to someone else. A quote from Crimson Highway. Quote, "Should be the duty of companies using harmful farming techniques to inform their customers of the destructive processes that go into making cheap products. And their products should be openly advertised as substandard. It's backwards that food that is grown normally is considered special and marketed as healthy." End quote. There is a pic that regularly pops up on my Facebook feed with a basket of fresh fruit and vegetables and the words, "Eat organic food," or as your grandparents called it, food. Speaking of food, our next post from the blog Life, Death and Radishes and is entitled Hugelkultur, a first time for everything. Hugelkultur we have touched on before. From the post, quote, "There are an endless number of ways to coax nature into working for you in the organic garden. So clearly my first choice was to pick the most labour-intensive. Yes, I chose the one that begged for digging." End quote. To start the system of Hugelkultur off does require some labour, but so does every system in the setup phase. Another quote. Quote, "The German technique of Hugelkultur is defined as the burying of wood, preferably wood that is already overcome by fungi and starting to get crumbly, but any wood will do as long as you give the bed or mound time to age before you plant it." A little further on in the same quote, "You can dig a trench or hole to bury large pieces of wood followed by smaller sticks and twigs and then leaves and finally top it off with soil. Alternatively, a Hugelkultur mound begins by laying the stuff on top of the existing ground, working your way up to a giant about 6 to 8 foot high, but I thought that would weed out the neighbours too much." End quote. So you either dig or you pile. Your choice in the end. This is the case with Hugelkultur, it is the case with garden beds. You know my preference by now. See in the show notes for a link to the World Organic News No Dig Gardening book. So Hugelkultur can be either no dig or dig. The point of the timber and decomposing timber is that the soil food it provides. Already decomposing timber means the wood won't suck nitrogen out of the pile and will in fact continue to feed the soil life around it. This is my last episode whilst on holidays here in Ireland. I'll be putting together some of my thoughts from the trip and releasing them as supplemental episodes, which will just appear in your feed. So that brings us to the end of this week's podcast. If you liked what you heard, could you please follow the link in the show notes and vote for World Organic News in the Australian Podcast Awards? Thanks in advance. Any suggestions, feedback or criticisms of the pod or blog are most welcome. Email me at podcast@worldorganicnews.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back in a week.